Hello and welcome to another episode of Existence. This is the podcast where we are exploring the question, what does it mean to exist and pursue a life well lived through the contemplation of love, death, philosophy, and connection. Today's episode is with Ariel Goodbody. He is a podcaster and host of Easy Stories in English, a podcast where he writes all of his own stories for those learning English at different proficiency levels. So I was super stoked he was able to come on and be vulnerable and talk about life and spirituality and what it all means. So super stoked he was able to come on and just talk to me in general about some of these things. So thanks for listening and hope you enjoy the episode.
All right, I'm probably going to get eaten alive by mosquitoes here, but, this is what we got. Hello, how's it going, Ariel? Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate you doing this. So I'm really happy you're able to join me. And for those who are listening, we met at a conference in London, the podcasting conference in London. And so it was really great to talk to you and kind of meet you and a few other people there that, are just in podcasting. And so it's a interesting world. And I think that's kind of nice to build a community around yourself. And I don't know if that's something you'd agree with. I don't know how large of a community that you have around yourself in terms of podcasters and stuff.
And honestly, not as much as I would like, actually. But yeah, I definitely agree. I think that's that's why I'm trying so much now to collaborate with other people, and even just like reaching out to listeners and like, I don't know, I'm thinking of interviewing some of my listeners at the moment because I think it's really great to take advantage of this format and get in touch with people.
Yeah. So super cool. So for those who don't know, if you don't mind giving like a brief introduction about yourself, kind of your background in podcasting and just yourself in general, so we can kind of start with that.
Yep, my name is Ariel Goodbody. I do a podcast called Easy Stories in English, where I write short stories in simple English for people learning English as a foreign language, and then I perform them, basically. I also do some vocabulary explanations and things like that. I kind of got into that because I started teaching languages, and I've always been interested in making things like podcasts and YouTube videos and writing, so it kind of just combined my interests. And especially the last few years, I've been getting a lot more in touch with like spirituality and just also philosophy in general. I had a very kind of dark period, makes it sound very dramatic, but I had a period last year where I completely burned out from work and I had to take a large break because for 3 months I basically completely lost the ability to speak. So that was a good opportunity for introspection. I did loads of journaling. And so, this whole thing of like thinking about existence, like I probably think about it too much is the problem.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. It's not, I think that's the cool thing about it is everyone's dealing with it. Everybody has their own take on what we're doing here, what we're going through. We all just seem to end up here and people have their different views on how it happened and what's going to happen and how to live it. So, that's really what I want to kind of discover in each individual person that I interview. So, I mean, for a podcaster, losing your voice, that is not a good thing to go through. How was that situation for you? How did you cope, and what happened exactly?
Yeah, so it's kind of complicated because I've never been like officially diagnosed with what that was because it's something very rare, right? I did a lot of research and I'm self-diagnosed as autistic, and that was already from years before. I'd kind of figured that out for myself, but getting a diagnosis as an adult in the UK is a very lengthy process. I mean, you can be on a waiting list for like 5 or 6 years. And getting a private diagnosis is extremely expensive and doesn't really have any benefits. As an adult, you don't really get any help. So I didn't see any point in pursuing that. But once I lost the ability to speak, I did a lot of research and, people call it non-speaking or non-verbal is a very common experience for a lot of autistic people. There are actually a lot of autistic people who are completely non-speaking, who People assume that they can't understand language, but often they actually can understand language, communicate through writing or like assisted technology devices. So I learned a lot actually kind of in this process, but essentially I kind of came to the conclusion that I probably have something that's called autistic catatonia, because I also had these symptoms of catatonia where I would sometimes lose the ability to move or to move easily. And so sometimes there have been, instances where my body has just completely shut down and I basically need someone to come and like help me move.
Oh, wow.
And it seemed to just be the kind of result of just chronic long-term stress and burnout, basically, which is kind of funny because, I know, I have like my brother or like people I know who are like really like high powered jobs and they work 50 hours a week. And like, I've never even worked a full-time job. So like, it feels a bit like, oh wow, like my, I guess my tolerance for stress and burnout is incredibly low. But I think the thing is I've always pushed myself a lot. So when it came to, going non-speaking, at first I was like trying really, I put my podcast on pause and I was trying really hard to like come up with strategies of like, okay, how can I change things? What are other things I can do? But eventually I realized I just had to give into it and just rest a hell of a lot. So for several months, I really just kind of read books, went for walks, took baths. I had like a period of like a month and a half where I had a bath every day.
Oh, wow.
That kind of stuff. A lot of journaling. I journaled so much as well.
That's great.
So that really helped. Yeah.
That's cool. And you're a writer as well. You write all your own stories for your podcast. So I'm sure that translates pretty well. I think that kind of speaks to the importance of just rest in general. I don't think people give enough credit to just giving yourself just time to kind of take a breather from life. And I think we all just get so caught up in the day-to-day, like working and making sure that everything's taken care of, and you have all these things to get to, and you have all these obligations, and everyone's obligations are varying, more and less serious, depending on who you are, what you're taking care of, and there's a million things you're trying to deal with, as well as just trying to balance your mental health and traumas you went through and trying to tackle the future. There's so much going on in every individual person's life that we rarely, I think, especially I feel like in today's culture, we always like value like the quote unquote like hustle person that's like trying to like get everything done all at once. And then somebody that's like, actually, like I really need to take a break from all of that is, I guess somehow, I don't know, maybe it has a stigma around it, but it's so important because we're just like, we are constantly on the move doing something. There's so many people doing what they got to go through, and being able to take a step back from all of that is, I think, just one of the most important things you can do, because it really kind of recenters yourself for the future you want to accomplish,
Yeah, and honestly, so one of the big changes when I came back from pausing the podcast, I went from doing one episode every week to one episode every 2 weeks, and it made such a difference, like in terms of everything, in terms of how rested I felt, how good the stories were, how much time I could dedicate to them. And generally, I agree. I think I almost see philosophy and poetry as very similar in that they're both these things that a lot of people struggle to see, like, what is the worth of this? Like, why should I read poetry? Why should I read philosophy? Why should I journal? All these things, right? And it kind of, in mainstream capitalist society, there's this idea of you have a problem, let's find the solution. It needs to be an active solution. You need to take some medicine. You need to go for a run. You need to do this. You need to try this new app that's going to change the way you work, right? Whereas often, actually, what you need to do is stop and slow down and actually just be in your body. I have a tattoo of a slug here. It's my first tattoo. I got it a few months ago. And I'm a bit weird. I like slimy creatures like slugs and toads and stuff. But one of the main reasons I got it was just to remind me to slow down, Slugs know where they're going. It's going to take them a while to get there, but they still go, right? And they still get there. And they've existed probably, I don't know, I'm not a biologist, but I think they've existed longer than humans have.
Yeah.
So.
That's really good. No, that's a really good point. It's a cool tattoo, by the way, too. You know, and also it kind of brings up a point that's kind of this isn't related necessarily to the conversation, but tattoos. I'm just thinking about this. Like, it's cool because it can remind you of something. As someone who doesn't have any tattoos, I never really thought about it as a reminder. I just set reminders on my phone, but like you could look down every day and it's like right there for you to look at. That's interesting. That's pretty cool. But yeah, no, I definitely agree. It is like that the mindset of like, oh yeah, we got to constantly be doing something, and when really what the best thing to do is nothing. Sometimes, you know, obviously things need to get done, but you know, we're all moving on some sort of trajectory. So, but you mentioned spirituality earlier. What is kind of been your path into that, and what would you say you you know, you don't have to define yourself in any way, but I think that's kind of the interesting thing about spirituality, where it can mean a lot of things for a lot of people. So what does it look like for you?
Well, you know, I was raised Catholic, so there's that, right? I went to a Catholic school, and like Roman Catholic. So, you know, most people in the UK, there's more like Anglicans and stuff. So the Catholics are really very serious about a lot of things. And I kind of became a bit of a edgy atheist in my teenage years and really like pushed that away for a long, long time. But it was when I was having this period of burnout last year where I was like, I need some kind of higher power. I need to believe that there is someone out there, regardless of who I am, regardless of if I never am able to speak again, if I'm never able to work again. I need to know that my life has a lot of purpose and meaning, and that there is like a higher power who I can submit to, because I think that's the big thing about spirituality. And it's a thing that a lot of people feel really uncomfortable about, this idea of submission, of saying, you know what, I can't do everything, right? Again, it comes back to that, like, you know, everyone wants to be like the hustling guy, like doing everything. But actually, sometimes you have to say, you know what, I'm too weak. I can't do everything. There are certain things that are simply above me. And it can be a huge release to do that, right? I think it's, you know, I see it as like, these are all parts of the human experience. And we need to, you know, just as we need to have parts of our life where we feel really in control and we're like maybe a leader or, you know, have responsibility for another person or an animal, there are times where we need the opposite, where we need to be able to just be powerless, right? So that's a big element. And then this year, I've started going to a lot of, so it's this organization called Quintimacy, and it's basically queer somatic bodywork events. So it sounds really woo-woo, especially, I don't know, like, for me as like a queer person, it's like, oh, cool. But for a lot of people, I explain it, they're like, okay. So it's basically like maybe 15, 20 people. And it's like a 3-day workshop. And we do lots of activities around like consent, massage, erotic massage, kind of just working with the body, doing things like interviewing each other's genitalia, that kind of stuff. So it sounds really weird, but it's really spiritual for me in the sense of a deep physical spirituality. Since doing that, I felt so connected and present in my body, and being able to, I think focus a lot of that energy of like, how do I feel? Am I sad? Really just focusing on like the bodily sensations, I think has really, really helped me connect to that spiritual element as well.
No,
so,
that's really interesting. I've never heard of anything like that. I think that's honestly, I think it sounds really cool. I always tend to not think anything's that weird because we're all pretty weird. We all have our own like weird things going on. I don't know. I feel like there's so much that there's ways that people cope, you know, and ways that people handle things, and it's up to each individual person to do that for themselves. So, you know, it's not there's nothing that's really that you know, obviously, you know, we shouldn't be hurting other people. There's but that sounds like just like such a interesting way to connect with yourself physically. You know, I think we probably associate spirituality a lot with the mental and like the consciousness side of things. But, you know, I think paying attention to like the physical side of spirituality is something I'll probably start thinking about even more because obviously, like I've thought about it, but not too intently as I have like the mental side.
Have you heard of the term body mind?
Yes, I have.
Before.
I mean, I've heard of it, but I haven't. Like, I mean, is it like would you be able to explain it a little bit more?
Yeah, basically, I mean, I came across it. I was kind of aware of the concept, but it really solidified for me. I read a book called Neuroqueer Heresies, which is all about neuroqueer, which is basically like kind of the overlap between neurodivergence, often autism, and then queerness. And it's basically, it's a very Western, modern, post-enlightenment idea that we have our mind and our body and they're separate, and not only they're separate, that the mind is somehow superior to the body, right? And the body mind is the idea of, there is no distinction. Your body is your mind. So, if you have a stomach problem, like a digestive problem, it's going to make you feel anxious, right? Like, even if you're like psychologically, you can be like, oh, I can reason this out. I know that's making me feel anxious. You still feel anxious, right? So it's kind of embracing that,
no, totally. It's like the concept of non-duality in a sense where, everything is connected. And I think that's something that goes, I don't know, maybe underappreciated sometimes because, we could always get, I think especially when we talk about like, at least being, from the U.S., like a lot of people aren't healthy there or, honestly anywhere. A lot of people could be unhealthy, but it's like, your mental health improves when you physically exercise because your physical body improves your mental body or your mental health and vice versa. You can't do anything. You don't want to get up and go for a run. You don't want to go out and go rock climb or go for a walk or whatever when you're just depressed and sitting in your room. Like and it's all interrelated. And so I think that's a really important concept to kind of think about even more intently because, at least myself, I get kind of, I feel like sometimes I can get caught up in modes of thinking, like where I'm thinking too much about my mental side of things and not so much about my physical side of things, or I think about my physical side of things more than I think about the mental side of things. But it's like finding that balance between the two that I think is the important thing. But balance is difficult.
So on that note, actually, I've just started doing a thing with my girlfriend because the other day, because we get caught in this cycle, and I think a lot of couples get caught in this cycle of saying, oh, are you okay? Oh, how are you? Oh, yeah, I'm doing okay. Or, oh, I'm a bit worse than before. But just kind of, it becomes this very simplified way of communication, right? And, you can say like, oh, maybe do you want a hug? But something I found really useful is I say, I proposed this as an idea to my girlfriend and she loved it and we do it all the time now, which is saying, what are 3 things you feel in your body right now? So just not thinking about feelings like, oh, like my scalp is a bit itchy. Oh, sorry, just whacked my nose.
Oh, no, you're totally good.
Oh, like my scalp is a bit itchy. My tummy hurts, whatever. It can be positive things as well. Like, oh, I'm tasting the nice food we're eating or whatever. And that's always, I find it, often it can be very revealing of like, oh, actually I'm anxious and tense and I didn't realize. But it's also just helps you be more aware of your body, and that is good for your well-being.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. And when do you do that? Do you guys like check up on it like once a day, or like how often do you guys do that?
God, well, I mean, so we started maybe like 3 or 4 days ago. It's a very new thing, but so far we're doing it probably like 5 to 20 times a day.
Like, how are you?
So
what is your body like?
We're both like very over communicators.
Yeah.
Like we like to be very, very explicit with communication.
No, that's good though, and that's huge. I mean, relationships are built on communication. I've know that because I've had relationships where I did not communicate, and then relationships where I communicated, and like obviously, that I prefer to take the same route of over communication rather than under communication. But, that leads into scary vulnerability, and that's a whole other topic. I mean, communication in general is so important. How do you find yourself to be what is it about over communication that you find yourself gravitating towards? Have you always been like that, or has it been something that you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the autistic stereotype of like, oh, I like to communicate really directly. But then also, I do have a theatre background, right? I did a lot of youth theatre. And so I learned to be a lot more improvisational and, fun and free with the way I communicate through that. But then becoming a teacher really kind of solidified like my communication skills, I would say, because when you're talking, teaching English as a foreign language specifically, you'll often have people from all different countries. So you have no, unifying factor. There's no other language you can turn to. So you really just have to be slow and clear. And I think through doing that, it's kind of seeped over into my normal communication, where even when I'm talking like conversationally with people, I'm very aware of like, ooh, am I saying things clearly? I also just, it's that thing of like, I put out into the world what I want to get back. Like with emails, for example, I don't write long emails. I write like, thanks for sending this. Let's do this. Bye. Like I just keep it short because I'm like, what's the point? Why are we sending all this? Why are we writing all these long paragraphs? Like let's just be clear, polite, professional, clear. Great. So, yeah.
Straight and to the point. I mean, that's good though. I mean, I feel like I can get caught up in like trying to say all the right things and then never get, and then like maybe prolong the conversation too much. But I don't know. I again, like I feel like I like talking in general, so I don't mind it. But I totally get like, cause like everyone's dealing with a lot of things. It's might be beneficial in certain circumstances to be more direct and to the point. But I feel like there's like a point for me at least where I want to make sure that everything I'm trying to get out is communicated well, and then if that doesn't really translate, I feel like I need to like just say even more. So maybe that's it goes back to the point of just over communication rather than under communication. But
yeah, I mean, I think it's hard because I had an experience recently with someone I met where we had such different communication styles, where she says a lot of stuff that I would like, read what she said or hear what she said. And I'm like, okay, but what do you actually say? Like, I couldn't figure out. And there was definitely this tension between us. But then eventually, actually, we found out one time we had like a conversation and we realized we had loads in common about like certain things. And we like really grew this connection. And we figured out, okay, like, let's meet in the middle. Let's figure out, where are we misunderstanding each other? And I think, communication is quite a general term, right? Because there's communication and then there's conflict. And conflict is the one that most people are scared of and don't want to deal with. And certainly I was not good at dealing with it in the past. But I feel like I kind of embrace conflict now, in the sense that there's this phrase my friend told me, and it's so cheesy, but it's conflict is a system crying out for change. So basically, if you're regularly having conflict with a person, it's like, okay, something here needs to change, either in the environment or the relationship. So I try now not to just be like bitchy and like nasty and say the worst things, but to be like, hey, I'm noticing this keeps happening. We are butting heads about this. Like, what do you think? Like, can we try and work something out? That kind of thing. Because I found in almost every situation where I willingly like engage in the conflict, I always feel better afterwards, and usually you find a solution.
Totally. But like I said earlier, that comes with vulnerability. So how do you do with vulnerability? How do you manage? I think this is kind of a question I always come back to with people, and trying to really discover it for myself as somebody who like tries my best, listens to a lot of Brene Brown and like tries to be like vulnerable, but it is difficult. It's one of the most difficult things, in my opinion, for myself to do, is to be vulnerable. But because it takes a certain sense of courage, because, when something, like you said, continually pops up and it's like continually a conflict in some sense, it takes like the vulnerable side of you to get that out and be like, hey, this is a thing that's hurting me or hurting you or hurting us or whatever. How do you approach that for yourself in your own relationships?
I mean, that's a hard question, because I would say that by making a podcast, you're doing the right thing, in the sense that, like, I think I learned a lot of vulnerability through just making stuff and putting it online. Like I was making YouTube videos when I was like 15, 16, back in like the 2010s, where like vlogging was this like super new thing and it was a really niche community. And I think just through doing a lot of stuff like that, you know what though, now that I think about it, it was having small spaces where I felt safe to completely express myself. And that was through like the early YouTube stuff. And then also I speak Esperanto. I can talk more about that if you want to hear. But going to Esperanto events, they're very niche. It's a niche community. So I was able to express myself very openly in that space. So I think it's finding the places and the people where you're like, okay, I can be really open and vulnerable here, and then gradually widening that out.
Yeah, no, totally. So wait, Esperanto. I've heard of Esperanto before. What is define Esperanto, and how do you speak it?
So Esperanto is a constructed language made by a Polish eye doctor in the 19th century with the goal of being like the lingua franca of the world. It's designed to be really easy. Obviously English kind of won out in that sense, but there are still a big community of people who speak Esperanto, and it's kind of like a subculture, I guess. So I've been to lots of Esperanto events, and actually so many of my close friends are Esperantists. And I would say the biggest advantage is, like, you know, I have a really close friend from Slovakia who has studied in the UK, but when we speak together, we always speak Esperanto, and that feels quite fair because it's neither of our native languages. Whereas if we were always speaking English, it would be like, oh, okay, like I have a privilege, an advantage over you here. And, you know, especially if they're in a situation with loads of British, you know, English native speakers, it can, you know, it puts a pressure on you as like a minority language speaker in that sense. So I think there is some real tangible benefits to it, especially in
interesting. How many people speak Esperanto in the world?
God, it's so hard to give like an accurate number, because it's like, how do you define speaking it? Because there are people who did a course for a few months and then gave it up, right? There's not an official census or anything. I've seen an estimate of like 1 million. That seems quite high to me. If we're talking about like active speakers, I would say at least a few, probably at least 100,000. But like that, I could, you know, it's really hard to say. There's enough people that there are, you know, regularly events in lots of different countries that have hundreds of people attending, sometimes thousands.
Interesting. So, That's interesting. It's funny because I was like, I've definitely heard of Esperanto. I was like, I don't even know what it is, but I've definitely heard of it. Interesting. That's cool. How long have you spoken it for?
About oh my god, probably about 14 years now. Yeah.
Fluent. How many words are in Esperanto compared to English? I don't know. I'm just interested.
Well, that again. Difficult question. I mean, Esperanto has super flexible word building. Like you can just make up words really easily.
Really?
And I've won third place in an Esperanto literary prize in the category of prose.
Interesting.
So I guess I can say I'm an authority on Esperanto literature somewhat. But yeah, it's definitely got like generally far fewer words because it's designed to be easier, right? But you can be much more flexible.
Okay. Do you mind saying something in Esperanto? I really just want to know how it sounds.
Bone, do ĉiuj homoj volas scii kiel sonas Esperanto, do ĉiufoje mi devas diri la samajn fekaĵojn, ke mi diras fakte nenion, sed bone mi diras.
Oh wow, what is that? What does that mean?
I was saying like, well, the thing is, everyone always wants to know how Esperanto sounds, so I just have to like make things up and say the same old crap, which doesn't really mean anything.
Okay, wow, that's funny. It sounds like a mixture of like, it sounds like a mixture of like Latin and German and like, so many different languages. Interesting. That's
basically, it has a lot of words from different languages.
Wow, that's interesting. So. Cool. Anyways, back on track now. No. Cool. So, I mean, I guess more, again, towards like the topic of spirituality, something I constantly go back to, and everyone does, the concept of death and non-existence, what it means to be here and then think about not being here. everyone has their own relationship with it. Everyone kind of thinks about it in their own way. And I asked this question because I like formulating, nothing in my mind is set in completely in the way. There's only probably like two things that I can name that are like, I'm pretty damn sure this is what I need to do, which is like just be loving to other people, and that's like number one. So it's like, besides that, like a lot of my mindset is flexible to a lot of things. So when I talk about the concept of death, I like to think about it in terms of like how other people see it, to kind of formulate my own opinions on it or my own ideologies pertaining to it, just to kind of get more of a sense of how other people view it in order to shape my views on what it all means, So I would like to kind of hear what you say, how you think about it at least, and what relationship you have to death currently. Big question.
I feel like, I feel like most people are scared of death, and I'm not. Like, if I was to die, like, tomorrow, if I, like, found out I was going to die tomorrow, obviously I might be like, wow, but I could probably deal with it, to be honest. Like, I mean, I don't know. I remember when I was, like, maybe, like, probably, like, 13 or 14, I was like, what if I killed myself as a thought experiment? Which is obviously such, like, an edgy teenager thing to think. Right? But, like, genuinely, like, I obviously... Even pain, like, obviously, because a lot of people, they're scared of the pain that comes with death, right? And I don't know, I have, like, quite a spiritual relationship with pain. Like, when I got my tattoo, I actually really enjoyed the pain part. Bit of a masochist, but also just, I believe we can overcome a lot. And not that it even necessarily makes us stronger. I just think it's, like, it's part of the fabric of existence, right? And we can't deny it. And then I feel like a lot of people are afraid of death because I guess maybe they're afraid of getting old and, becoming weak and disabled, essentially. And obviously I've had the experience of becoming disabled, kind of unexpectedly. And that was a thing that I had to process a lot of, like, kind of coming to terms with that. But now I'm very comfortable with that. And, I'm very, I read a lot. I don't know. Do I read a lot?
It's all relative.
I engage a lot, I guess, with, like, disability studies and disability rights activism and neuroqueer stuff. So for me, like, that's not a fear because, I experience it, but also it doesn't define me and it's not all the time. Right? Does that make sense? So I guess for me, death it's kind of, it's chill. So I don't know, like, it's, good example. This year, my German grandmother passed away. It's a bit complicated. So technically she was my half brother's grandmother, but she kind of treated us all like her grandchildren. And that did hit me really hard. And it was probably the most I've ever cried at a funeral. And then I felt kind of guilty because I cried more than with my maternal grandmother, who, arguably I should have had a stronger relationship with, or, a closer relationship. But, I really just, I think because, not that she was ready for death, but I think it was a relief in a lot of ways. And I guess it kind of was in both cases, but, I don't know. Sorry, I feel like I've gone off onto a very dangerous tangent where I'm processing feelings of grief on camera. So let's move away from that. I don't know. Okay, so it's not like I don't get sad about. Right? I feel grief, and it's complex and messy, right? But I guess what I'm curious is when you ask about death to most people, like, what is their reaction?
I mean, I think I get everything, Some people say it's chill, and some people say it's something that's on their mind a lot and something that they're really afraid of, And I think that's the relation. I think that's just kind of the human condition, is that everybody views death differently, and some people really maybe are afraid of death, of dying, but not afraid of death itself, or they're afraid of death itself and not really afraid of dying, or not at all, just kind of accepting what it is. And yeah, I would say, for myself personally, it lies somewhere in between. I don't, I think about death often. I mean, there's a reason why I started a podcast about death and spirituality and things like that. But at the same time, I don't let it affect. I feel for me, and I've said this before, it's like it's such a motivating factor for me, where I don't become bogged down by it. It doesn't force me to like. I should say, I guess a better way of phrasing that would be I don't let it affect me to the point of where it stalls me, And so, for me, death is something that is, it's just, it's not here yet. So as long as it's not here yet, I'm going to do my absolute best to make the most of whatever this life is, And so that's the approach I take to. That's the mindset I have behind it. But I understand that not everybody has that mindset. It could be very much freezing for a lot of people, and I totally get it. I understand. Like, when this is all you know is life. What is that? What does death even mean? Is it something to be concerned of if it's not even here? But I don't know. I mean, I find it interesting to kind of get everyone's different. Obviously, like I asked the question because I'm really interested in what other people have to say about it. It's something that is we are all affected by, and we all see it every day. Whether it's not with humans, it could be with animals like flies, like everything, like plants, like everything is dying and constantly in the cycle of death and rebirth every day all around us, and so.
And that's really more how I view it is, it's part of a cycle, and not viewing it so within myself. And like, I do tarot readings with my girlfriend, and the tarot card death, people think, oh my God, if you get this card, it means you're going to die. But no, like one of the core meanings is rebirth and, growth, right? And like, I was watching this video the other day about a guy who built like a wildlife pond and got all of the, frogs and different kinds of birds, and it was really diverse, created this little ecosystem. But then snakes came along and started eating the frogs, and my initial reaction was like, oh no, kill the snakes, they're killing the cute little frogs. But then it's like, no, like predation is an important part of a healthy ecosystem. And it's like, oh yeah, no, that frog's got to die. So it's all necessary, and I understand why people are afraid of it and why they might want to prolong it, but I think there's a lot of power in just accepting it. And that was actually the real sad thing with my grandmother, who passed away at the end of last year, because she was very comfortable with death. She grew up, she lived through World War II. She had 2 children commit suicide. Wow. She had other relatives die from illnesses and stuff. And she always said, she's like, you know what, when it's my time, I know exactly, how I want to go, and I know how I'm going to do it. But then of course what happened was she injured herself, and then she was in a, old people's home for a long time, and kind of bedbound, unable to do stuff. So she didn't have that control. And that was really sad. But, I think, we gotta, it's a cycle.
No, I think it kind of, for me, it asks the question, what is the purpose of that cycle, And I think that's something I think about is like, why is it that way to begin with, And these are unanswerable questions, obviously, but I think that's where, again, and I've said this before, is like, I think that's where so much of the value and some of the most profound insight and wisdom can kind of come from, is like asking these unanswerable questions that nobody will ever have the answers to, but it's good to think about, at least for myself personally, because it brings this aliveness to life in general. It brings this more curiosity and this wonderment about like, what's happening here. And I think that's something I often forget about I shouldn't say forget about, but I'm constantly reminding myself of is the process of like, this is actually pretty insane how we just ended up here, and where people are dying and people are being born on the same day, and none of it makes sense because some people have great lives and some people, have less than favorable lives. And why is it like this? What is happening? But there's also so much love and there's so much joy and there's so much beauty amongst all the trauma and the heartache. So like it's like almost pursuing life in it of itself rather than the transitory things that is just life in general. Just so many things that happen and come and go. So I mean, I don't know if you would agree with that.
Well, on that note, this is why I think there's a real tendency these days to try and like really professionalize the creation of art, especially with like YouTube and stuff, but even with writing, there's a lot of people who talk about, just do your daily writing, hit your word count, pump out your novels, XYZ. And, I truly believe that the creative process is like, it's a reflection. It's like a microcosm of like, the creation of the world, right? It's like, it's literally life propagates itself. And it's just everything you're looking at on different scales, whether it's a bacteria multiplying, whether it's someone giving birth, or whether it's you're writing a story, right, or whatever. And so, it is a divine process, even if it's something that happens very regularly. I think if we can bring in that consciousness and awareness into creative stuff, but into pretty much everything we do, I think it, helps us feel more complete. And a lot of people don't want to take necessarily a really spiritual view on it, but you can just say, well, something like rituals, regardless of where the motivational, like the reasoning behind it comes from, I think everyone benefits from doing rituals, right? And I think, we have to just, I think that's why being in tune with our bodies is really the way forward, because you figure out what feels good. Like doing tarot readings, for example, it's something I'd been interested in for years, but I always felt a bit awkward. I wasn't sure of like the right way to do it. And I was viewing it into too much of a mechanistic approach. And now I'm like, oh, this is really just a tool for thinking and like kind of ideating into the world. So I went on off in a tangent because I forgot what you asked.
Oh no, you're totally good.
Useful.
No, yeah, everything is useful. Everyone's ideas are useful. No, I agree with you, especially on the ritual part. It's interesting that I'm glad you brought it up, actually, because I was talking about this with my partner. She was saying that she was like, oh, the importance of rituals I feel like is something that's lacking within like more, I don't know, like secular people or like secular communities, because with religion especially, there is this veneration of rituals, and it's something that's very important to people within certain communities religiously. And this was something I kind of my eyes opened up to a little bit more, because I went and with her family, her little sister was having like a first communion, for like a Catholic first communion, and so I like filmed it, and it was interesting, and it was interesting to kind of like see what it was. Well, I didn't really know. I had been to like Catholic church before, obviously, when I was like really little, but it was It was an interesting reminder. My point being is that rituals kind of, they have this importance, and they have this community aspect to it, and like a reconnection with what you think, with what is important to you. And I think that's something that probably is lacking within certain secular culture, just because of the fact that I feel like a lot of people, a lot of the times, are kind of like free floating in this space of like, I don't know what's happening. I don't really know. Like rituals seem like a religious thing, and I'm not religious, or people are like vehement atheists, and they're like, I don't want to touch rituals because that's a completely religious thing. And a lot of people are in between those two. So I mean, it's I think it's something that is important, but it's not necessarily something we have to make religious. It's just the importance of being connected, finding a space or like something that helps you reconnect with whatever you find important spiritually or whatever it may be. And, you know, I think that's probably something that I could do a better job of myself, and just trying to connect, just being more grateful to whatever it is. And this is actually something that I've thought about, and we've talked about, me and my partner, about just being grateful whenever we sit down to eat. Because I know growing up, like, my parents would always, like, thank God for the food we had. You know, it's like, oh, thanks for the food. And I was like, okay, like, cool. And I was Christian when I was young. But you know, I don't not believe in God. I think it's like a, you know, that's a topic we can dive into. But I think just thanking life, God, whatever you want to call it, like just thanking the ability to eat and to be nourished by life. I think that's an important thing, you know, regardless of like what connotation you put on it. It's an important thing to just be grateful for what that is.
Absolutely.
And I think, yeah.
And especially these days, I mean, the fact that I'm in England, you're in Hungary, we're having a conversation. I always like try to take a moment, like, isn't it crazy that we're like talking like thousands of miles away from each other? Like, that's just wild to me. You're in a park, I'm in my house, and I feel like it's so easy to devalue, and especially, you know, a lot of people, they live in a lot of negativity about the time we live in, and obviously there are things that are, you know, very bad and we should be critiquing, but also, like, you know, there are experiences that we are having in this day and age that, like, people in the past couldn't dream about, right? And we should be grateful for them. We should be grateful for the huge variety of food we're able to eat. And again, I say that as, you know, I'm very critical of like global supply chains, the way all this stuff is structured. But I guess actually kind of a way of kind of reconciled that tension a bit is finding gratitude for like the most simple things in nature. Like, whenever I see a new kind of flower now, I always go and smell it, because often they don't smell, but I'm like, I just want to know if it smells, and if it smells nice, that's fabulous, because I learned something new and I've got a new smell, you know. It's like, it's just putting it out for free. It's great.
No, yeah, it is. It's the small things. And I think it's the reminding yourself of that, you know. It's like, make it more of a, you know, if you want to call it a ritual or whatever, but just being grateful for the small things in life that you kind of overlook every day, like being able to eat in abundance, or like being able to have a conversation on the internet, or just, you know, being, I don't know, healthy, or not you know, being diagnosed with a terminally ill disease or whatever. Like, there's a million things, you know, and everyone's situation is different. So there's a million things we can be grateful for and recognize. And it's taking the time to slow down, stop for a second, and then think for a minute about, wow, all these things that in my life I can be grateful for. And, you know, that doesn't negate the real problems that you go through and other people go through. Of course, like, there's a lot to figure out, and there's a lot of traumas that are happening, you know, and those are very important to address. But that's I think that's, you know, it's not, you can't, you know, you don't have to exclude also the amazing things you can be grateful for every day. And this is something that I, to the consternation of my girlfriend, she's like, I make her do like 3 things we're grateful for every day, and she bears with it, thank God. But I've always like, we got to do 3 things every day, because there's literally, like, I could, you know, if we really thought about it, we could name off a lot of things, but I think 3, you know, small things. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be, you know, like this huge thing. It's just small things. Like, I'm just grateful to have a bed to sleep in, because I see like homeless people on the street, and that's not cool. And I'm not one of those people. Like, that's just something I'm grateful for. As well as
it is funny with that as well, because I think it really depends on the dynamic between people. Like, I when I'm with by myself or with my girlfriend, like we don't do that kind of thing because I think we don't need it. You know, we don't tend to go so much into that negativity. But I have another really close friend who, when we get together, our like natural tendency is to complain about everything, and we can really work ourselves up about stuff. So with them, we do try to practically be like, oh, okay, what are some positive things from today? So I think it's, and that comes back to that thing about communication, where, you know, often it's finding what works for these people or this community, right? And again, rituals, it's not just about the individual, but it's about, if a ritual is practiced in a community or a couple or a group of people, like, what does that say about our values, right? So yeah, it's really interesting also because I read something the other day in a Substack I follow, that there's like an academic article about basically arguing that the modern concept of health can be considered a religion, in the sense that there are people who, you know, the way they treat health fits all the criteria of a religion, in terms of like, you know, people who are into like Wim Hof, like cold therapy, or like really hardcore yoga or whatever. They have their temples, which are their gyms or whatever. They have their like secret method, like, oh, like, you know, there might be Gnostic Christians, but it's like, oh, I do my like secret Nordic body training or whatever. And they have their like dogma of like, this is the only way to be healthy and live a long life. So, and then that becomes somehow some kind of purity or like spiritual superiority. So I think
Interesting.
nowadays, so many people, in the attempt to escape from religion, just end up creating their own, you know, religions without realizing it. So
Yeah. And you know, it's funny when you say like, I don't think that just applies to gym people. I think that can apply to like business people, you know, too, or work, like showing up at the office every day and going through the 9 to 5, and then, you know, thinking about it constantly, and like constantly bringing it home and bringing it into relationships. I mean, I think you could apply it. I mean, it kind of goes to the idea of like what religion is. And you know, that's a treacherous topic, but I mean, as someone who takes my health pretty serious, my physical health, I mean, as well as my mental health, but I really do try to maintain a good level of physical fitness for myself, mainly because I just have like such a high energy level where I'm just constantly trying to do something physical. I don't necessarily see it as a religion, but I guess you could view it that way.
One of the kind of key things was this idea of prolonging life, that a lot of people are obsessed with, like, oh, if I fast and do cold therapy, I'm going to live longer. But it's like, why do you want to live longer? Like, what's the point of living longer if you're miserable because you're spending the whole time like obsessively dieting and exercising? Like, what's the point, you know?
Yeah, well, we definitely can get to an unhealthy state for sure, and I've been in those unhealthy states, so I can relate to like yeah, being a person who's like, it doesn't matter, like I'm doing everything I can to improve my health, when really improving my health doesn't entails actually resting, and I like didn't give myself a break, and I was not eating what I should be eating when I thought those things were healthy. And yeah, I definitely agree with that. It could be it can definitely get to a point where you're I think that's also interesting, is like when you're just so focused on one way of being, when you actually think something is good for yourself, but in hindsight, and especially objectively, if somebody's able to tell you, or you're able to see it objectively, that it's actually really not good for yourself, and you're just so blinded by it. But it can be really difficult to see that, because I mean, you're only in your own perspective of things. I don't know if you've gone through similar experiences like that.
Yeah, I think the body is this is why I really try to focus on this being in tune with my body, because often the body knows what it needs, and if you deny it what it needs, then it will find its own coping mechanisms, right? So now I'm very good at listening to my body and being like, oh, if I'm feeling tired, like, do I want to go to the social activity? Is it actually really going to be worth it for the level of exhaustion? You know, really like feeling like, how does this decision feel, right?
Yeah.
But in the past, and you know, let's make it general, a lot of people smoke, a lot of people binge drink, a lot of people do whatever, that is a coping mechanism. And it's their body is kind of like, okay, you're not giving me the actual thing I need, whether it be emotional needs or like rest. So I'm finding another thing that's trying to like fill in the gap, maybe chemically, for example. And a really interesting anecdote about that is, I don't know if you've heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
I might have heard of it, actually.
Yeah, so it's all about post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay.
But one of the studies they talk about in it is where it was like a group of overweight people. I think maybe it was just women, and they got them to like follow this regime to lose weight with the goal of like improving their health outcomes, right? And they found with several of the people in the study, when they lost weight, they started self-harming. And what they eventually came to the conclusion was, oh, these people were, traumatized individuals, and, binge eating, their body had found a way somehow to, not deal with the trauma, but to at least, soften the effects through weight gain and through a lot of eating. And so as soon as that was taken away, it was like, well, I need some other form of self-regulation, right? And obviously self-harm is a really bad form of self-regulation, but essentially it's what your body is trying to do. So I think with a lot of people, it's like they're just looking like one step ahead, whereas really you need to kind of like take a zoom out kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think many people are probably trying to, like you said, fix the immediate problem and not try to fix the root of the problem.
Yeah,
but
which is
I think
why
that can be...
I think philosophy is so useful, because it's literally all about like, let's take the most abstract view possible, right?
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree completely. I mean, I feel like philosophy for me has given me so much in terms of just thinking differently, just thinking in a way where I wouldn't normally think, like you said, an abstract view of reality, or an abstract view of the mind, or whatever possibly can be conceived of. And for me, that brings so much meaning, and it really has altered my trajectory in life, just thinking about what life is. And there's so many avenues within philosophy. I mean, you could take it anywhere. Political philosophy, or philosophy of the mind, or aesthetics, which is really interesting. And I think that's something I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about, which is the idea of, as a creative person, it's something that I'm embracing much more recently. I would say within the past handful of months, I've really been trying to cultivate the creative mind within myself. And it's not something that I necessarily have always thought of myself as a creative person. I'm pretty... I don't know. I feel like I'm a more logical person, and rather than I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but I've never really thought of myself as like a creative person. But within the past handful of months, I've really been trying to embrace that side of me, not only to improve, this podcast, but just to really just kind of gain a different understanding of art, and what that can bring to all person's life. So I kind of want to get your take on art, and how you view the creative side of existence.
Yeah. Ooh, I'm just thinking of where to approach it from.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's always been something where I was always... I'm trying to sound this without making it sound like a bit pretentious or boastful, but I've always just been very creative in the literal sense of I just want to create things, right? Like writing little stories, making little projects. And like, I think unfortunately, because I struggle a bit with the physical aspect, right? Like I'm quite a clumsy person. So like, for example, God, when I was in primary school, or even reception, like the lowest, like very early school in the UK, I had to get like extra classes with the teacher for my handwriting, because my handwriting was horrendous. Like I could not draw within the lines. I couldn't color within the lines. So because of that, I think I like kind of really focused on writing and stuff, because that was like safe, and I was good at that, and I was good at spelling and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But recently I've been coming back a lot more to the more kind of visual, physical elements of creativity. And I haven't read a lot. I don't think I've read any aesthetic philosophy, but I watch quite a few like YouTube video essayists who talk about that kind of thing. And I'm getting quite fascinated with it, yeah, because I think the biggest realization I had recently was, I guess I'm what you would call an interdisciplinary artist, and that I really, while writing is like my main thing, I feel, I really just want to do all kinds of creativity. And I try not to just siphon it out from the rest of things. So, like a weird discovery I had recently is that when sorting and like tidying stuff in my house, I get very creative. So like several times over the last week, I'll be in the morning, I get this like, because we're moving house later this year, so like, okay, we need to throw away stuff, we need to take stuff to the dump, we need to sort stuff. So I've been doing that in the morning, and then I'll find like, oh, an old postcard I got given years ago, or like, I don't know, like, so I was like, oh, let me just like write a postcard to a friend I haven't talked to in ages, and I'll post that later, which for me is like weirdly very spontaneous for that kind of thing. And then yesterday it was like we'd come back from holiday and I'd bought some earrings that were wrapped in this like really nice like tissue paper that's like I can't remember the name, like, oh god, you know, in that old form of dyeing paper with like the swirls of color, it's called bass something, I don't remember. Anyway,
Not sure.
it was very pretty tissue paper. And I just spontaneously was like, I'm going to like cut up a piece of cardboard, I'm going to glue it on, and I'll write like a postcard on the back and I'll post it to my friend. And then I got really into it, and I took like several bits of tissue paper and I was like cutting holes in them and sellotaping them and like adding little ribbons. And essentially what I made, I mean, it was, you know, very, very like GCSE art, right? Like very like, you know, I'm not going to win any awards for it, but I had a lot of fun. And I kind of started it without thinking of like, because I've been thinking for ages like I want to do collage, right?
Yeah,
But then
yeah.
when I thought I want to try collage, it's like, okay, let me sit down, let me gather my materials. But this was just completely spontaneous in the moment, and I had a lot of fun. And I was like, I'm going to send this to my friend and hopefully they'll like it.
Nice.
And I really think creativity is this thing that, you know, because from a capitalist perspective, it makes sense to kind of professionalize it and put it in the category of like only these people get to be creative. A lot of us are like scared of it. Like you said, you didn't consider yourself a creative person, and I just think everybody is creative. Like it's a necessary part of our experience. And what really like hammered that home for me was when I teach languages, I don't really teach anymore, but I did quite a bit in the past, and I use a method called TPRS, which is based on storytelling and collaborative storytelling with students. And almost when I worked with adults, it was so common. They would say like, oh, I've listened to a podcast, I really like it, I really like the idea of writing stories together, but I'm not a creative person. And every single time they were creative. They had, some of them said, I'm not a creative person. And then we wrote the most ridiculous stories. I had this one student where we wrote this story about like this couple who went to Burning Man and took ayahuasca from this like witch. Like it was, and then one of them went on a pilgrimage to meet the Pope and snorted cocaine with the Pope. I mean, it was so funny. So yeah, I truly do believe everybody is creative.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I agree with you. I think it's about cultivating it and fostering that within yourself. If you don't care to foster it, then, you know, it doesn't show as much as somebody who really gravitates towards that and really wants to cultivate that within themselves. It's like anything, you know, if you try to cultivate it within yourself to do something, then you're going to at least do more of it. You know, maybe not, you know, at the very least, you're going to be doing more of it, and that improves and you get better over time. And you know, I think that's interesting. I think that's what's interesting about art is like it can be so subjective, and so, you know, what defines good art is something that it's not necessarily something that you can't pin it down. It's not like you can find like one specific thing that this is what makes art good, or this is what makes something creative. And I think that's what's cool about it, because it's so open to so many people. And now that I have been trying to foster this within myself and within like the things that I do, I found now like things are coming to me so much easier. I'm like, oh, like I have all these ideas of all these things I want to do now within like the domains of what I find interest in. Like my creativity doesn't, I'm not like I don't do like crochet or like knitting or stuff like that. But like I really like, I'm really gravitating towards like filmmaking and doing this podcast and making videos and stuff like that. So I think that's really cool for myself personally, and it's made me think so much differently and kind of see the world through a more creative lens and a more aesthetic lens that's individual to me. And that's what I think what makes such cool art is the fact, or is the individualness of everything. The one thing that nobody can take from you, and this is what my partner tries to instill in me, and I thank her for it because it's really helped me a lot, is like the uniqueness of you, the uniqueness of the person that you are, and nobody else can be you. Like there's a lot of things you could do. There's a lot of things we can there's a lot of things that are out there that, can seem like the same thing, but nobody can be you yourself. Nobody can see the world through your mind. And if you start to really appreciate that and teach that within yourself creatively, and start to see the world through your own unique creative lens, then you can make some really, really cool things. And like, who cares what other people are thinking about it? Because if you think it's cool, that's what's cool. And I think that's also like what I really try to focus on with my podcast specifically. It's like, I think I'm definitely getting away from it. But when I first started, I was like, well, how could I make this look like the podcast that I see on the ones that I like, And it's like, and now I'm like trying to like run away from that as much as I can, because I think I can do it my way, and I think my way looks better to me, and like that's all that matters, and the people who like it will like it, and the people who don't.
If you keep doing podcasts in the park, I think that's brilliant. I wish more people did that. There's a podcast I started listening to recently called, I've actually got a little ad for it here.
Oh, sick.
I got it at the podcast.
Where are you going?
Where are you going?
Sick.
And literally, it's just a woman who goes up to people in the street, at the train station, wherever, nice, and just says, hi, I'm doing a podcast. I just want to ask where you're going. And they just chat for a bit.
Awesome.
And it's so cool because I'm like, and it's given me a lot of ideas. Like I want to experiment more with like, I guess you could call it rapportage, but just, interviewing people, talking to people, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because there has to be an element of play, right? And that's the thing why I say everyone is creative. Even if you're never going to produce art for other people, where you're like, okay, this needs to have an objective quality of standard of quality, and like I'm trying to do something with this. Creative play is like really nurturing for our spirits. And as creative people who are putting work out there, and we're like, okay, I do take this seriously, you have to balance the hard work with play. And bring in play as a regular practice, right?
Yeah,
so
totally.
Absolutely. So that sounds really cool, and I'm really interested to see. I think podcasts in the park should be like the new thing. That sounds fun.
Yeah, no, I think podcast. I'm really trying to gravitate towards the nature side of things, and that's what park, anywhere that looks cool. I'm thinking about going into abandoned buildings or something cool. I don't know, anywhere I can really get either have Wi-Fi or have somebody join me because I'm glad I'm doing this remotely, because I really try to stay away from remote just because I didn't think it was that aesthetically pleasing. But I think the way I'm doing it now is gonna hopefully be pretty cool. So, but before we wrap things up here, I'm getting eaten by mosquitoes and the light is running out. So I got to get out here.
My throat's getting pretty dry as well.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I appreciate you telling me. I kind of want to actually two things. One being, I try to end all the heavy conversation on music recommendations. So if you have, what are you most excited about listening to right now? It doesn't have to be your favorite artist, doesn't have to be anything big, but what are you most excited about listening to right now?
God, that's a hard question because I haven't been listening to very much music recently. Like I'm not. I mean, even though I used to play the saxophone for a really long time,
Yeah.
I'm not. I think because I often get like sensory overwhelmed. So like when I bring in music, it's quite like intentional. But there is an album. Okay, there's an album that I discovered a few months ago, but it's really interesting. It's oh my god, the band is called Ibibio Sound Collective.
Okay.
And I believe the album is called Electricity.
Okay.
But the kind of the first song on the album, and like really the best one, I think, is called Protection from Evil.
Okay.
So it's, I think, if I remember correctly, it's a Nigerian like pop electro group based in the UK, but I might have got that wrong. But it's basically it's like a style of music that is not super popular these days, like and it uses a mixture of languages, like some in English, some in other languages. But I just really, it's really just like it feels really fresh and really like interesting and just like fun. And it's I love listening to songs in other languages because I'm like a big language nerd, but there's something great about like a pop song where you're like jiving to it, where you're like, I have no idea what they're saying, but like this is like a jam, you know?
Totally. So, I feel you on that one. I listen to a lot of music now that I just have no idea what it says, but it sounds beautiful, it sounds cool, so I'm like, all right, I'll take it. Music doesn't have to be understood to be enjoyed, for sure. Awesome. Well, I'll link that in the description for anyone who's interested in checking it out. And then please, before we head out, if you want to shout out anything you're working on, and I'll obviously link any of your projects down in the description, so please.
I wore the wrong T-shirt because earlier I was wearing a T-shirt that that has like it's got the logo for a podcast I was just collaborating with. So so obviously Easy Stories in English is my podcast, and then recently I did an episode on Pioneers of the Continuum, which is basically like an 8-episode miniseries written by another ESL podcaster. Where all of the episodes are voiced by different, I guess, big name ESL podcasters. And that was really fun. So it's a story about time travel. My episode came, as we're recording this, it came out today. But obviously it'll probably be a while before you edit this and stuff. So there's that. And then I'm just launching like a subscription model for my podcast. And as part of that, I'm doing bonus episodes. But I'm really experimenting with different things like... I'm doing like interviews and stuff like that, and maybe more like I had this idea to do like soundscapes. So like I'll travel to a place and I'll just record a lot of like background noise, kind of like you've got in the park, and then like really use that as like anchors to like guide an episode. So
really
that's
interesting.
Something I've got the idea, but I haven't given it a try yet. So I've got lots of pots boiling and pies with fingers in them and such. So on.
Awesome. Cool. Well, whatever you have, I'll link it in the description.
And you've disappeared, so I don't know if you heard any of it.
Oh, no, I did. I heard you. Can you still hear me? You're still good. But this is ending anyway, so I'm going to end it right here, and then you could still stay on the line here. Can you still hear me? We were so close to the end. All right, well, the video cut out, but thank you. I want to thank Ariel for being on the show and talking to me. It was great having them on and talking to them. This is kind of a disappointing ending for that great conversation, but it is what it is. So that'll be that. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode.